Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video number 259. Doomsday predictions are a dime a dozen. Yes, I'm referring to coronavirus here. I see people saying it's Armageddon, this is God's judgment and stuff like that, or the devil, I guess, has come. It's the final pope. The pope will get coronavirus and die, and then the Antichrist will come. This sort of stuff, it seems to be like every 3 or 4 years everyone thinks the world is ending. Every time there's a pandemic of any sort, like I remember SARS, MERS, H1N1, all of these, people were making the same predictions. Earthquake in Utah the other day, oh, Revelation is here. I hear it over and over again, and when you're younger, like, 10 years younger in my case, it was always very fun. Like with the Mayan Doomsday prophecy and stuff, you'd watch documentaries about the Black Death and Revelation and Satan and stuff. And it's exciting. It can be quite fun. Over time, though, it gets a little bit old. Because the problem is, if you look at a list of specific end times predictions, there's a whole Wikipedia article, and of course I don't really like Wikipedia at this point for their cultural Marxist linguistic nonsense, but it's still an interesting article. There's it's a list of end times prediction, dates back to, ancient Rome, prior even to Christianity. That's the other thing. A lot of people think that only Judeo-Christians believe in that concept. Well, there's a loose concept believed in by other cultures for what would count for an apocalypse or an Armageddon of sorts. Usually it's not an end of the world in the complete sense, it's an end of a cycle. Like with the Mayan calendar, I pointed this out, I think a year before it culminated in 2012. The idea was that they saw time as cyclical, and so the end of one back ton doesn't mean the end of the world, it means the end of a cycle. If there is something apocalyptic, it's not the end of man or of the earth, it's simply a disaster of sorts. The idea of Ragnarok. Ragnarok is not a finality. Ragnarok predates the rebirth of everything. It's sort of a symbol of the seasons, winter and spring and so forth. It's a little bit more literal than that in most proper interpretations, but it is also symbolic. But it doesn't have to do with an end. People have been predicting the end times with every epidemic. The only time that it ever really truly made sense would be when you're talking about the Black Death. The Black Death is the only time in human history that there's been an epidemic with a high enough fatality rate over enough of the populated surface of the world to truly knock human beings down a peg. In most cases, the death toll's nowhere near high enough to cause anything other than slight generational shift, like you have a lost generation with the Spanish flu, killing a lot of young people off, actually. You have a lost generation sort of thing, feeling of emptiness or whatever. With coronavirus, certainly, the number of infections is now quite high. It's a significant pandemic from that perspective. The number of dead remains fairly low. And even if we use proper math and we understand that you shouldn't be comparing the number of deaths to the number of total confirmed cases, but rather to the recovered caseload, in which case the death rate is somewhat higher, even if you're looking at that, looking at the demographics of those that die, the overall spread over time, the total caseload of the number dead to the number that have recovered. Unless you delve into sort of the weird side of YouTube thing or go to like natural news or whatever and you say, well, coronavirus destroys your lungs forever and rips your testicles off and causes, it's basically space AIDS or something. Unless you are looking at the not really confirmed shit, quite honestly, about it, I hate to say it, but for the average person it is like influenza. For the average person in the population. If you look at places that are getting hit hardest, they have older populations demographically. Italy has a very old population overall. I'm not surprised their death rate is higher. I'm also not surprised that in such a densely populated part of the world, parts of Italy, urban Italy definitely are, I'm not surprised it's spreading so quickly. Then you've got the overly optimistic side, which is, oh, well, when the sunshine comes back in full force around May, it's going to wipe the virus out. Well, it would be nice to believe that. But we're not sure because we've never experienced a summer with coronavirus, so we'll see. We'll see if that helps. My hope is that it'll help at least a little bit and it'll sort of help us clear it up through our own efforts, or there'll be an asymptomatic variant and nature will take care of it. But it's not the end of the world. End of the world predictions are constant. I hear them all of the goddamn time. Hillary's the Antichrist. Trump is the Antichrist. Every political leader is labeled the Antichrist. There were people that labeled presidents of the United States the Antichrist back in the 1800s. I remember there was one clip, I think it's from, what was it, Wally George or something, where some crazy dude in a skirt and shit, some obvious hippie there, was like, he thought Ronald Reagan was the Antichrist. And I think Wally George threw him out after that because, of course, he was a big Reagan fan. It's just like weird shit like that. The history of end times banter is itself almost more interesting than the predictions themselves. But all of those predictions, keep in mind, there's a 0% success rate for end times predictions. This has been a consistent feature because we're still around. The Earth is still here. Ultimately, the two big things are pandemic and nuclear war. The pandemic would be one of the two big things that's most likely to fuck mankind, but the thing is, it's very unlikely that you're ever going to get a pandemic that's 100% lethal, and that will also manage to infect everyone before some people manage to hunker in the bunker and let everything burn over and then come out to repopulate after a period of underground subterranean vault dwelling or something. Nuclear war. Even a full-on nuclear war would be unlikely to kill every human being. There'd still be a core of humanity left, mostly in remote southern hemispheric locations. They would be able eventually to repopulate quite handily, and then inherit the smoldering, ruined, cratered wreckage. There'd be a lot of crater lakes around the world. Yeah, there'd be a lot of lakefront property on all of the different glowing seas of the world, where cities used to be. It'd be very interesting, I'm sure. I don't sit there worrying about the end times. From a perspective as a believer in magic and the pagan side of occultism, as a believer in these things, there's no room within my spiritual viewpoint for an end times per se of any relevance to me. Long term, eventually, yeah, an asteroid will hit our planet and wipe out all human life. And we probably won't have colonized other planets and we'll go bye-bye at that point. Or a massive sunspot will hit the Earth and fry all of the electrical systems, and nuclear war will erupt, and the stragglers will straggle on for 1,000 years and be all crippled and fucked up. These things probably will happen, but they probably won't happen in my lifetime, and if they do, there's nothing I can really do to avoid them. I'm not worried about climate change. The world's not going to turn into Tatooine. I'm not worried about the Antichrist, which will never exist because there is no truth to that story. It's largely fable. A lot of these things are symbolic anyway. People are always going over like the Bible code shit. They go over the Quran or the Bible or the Torah or something, and they claim to have deciphered the hidden meaning of Revelation and Leonardo da Vinci and stuff like that. And it never happens. It's always very exciting and very, very much something that the population likes, and it's really fun to read, and you have a lot of bestsellers written about it, but it never actually occurs. There's never actually another Jesus coming down out of the skies. There's no Mahdi coming to destroy Dajjal. It never happens. That's about all. Peace out.